Have you ever waited for someone's call so long that the silence itself starts to speak louder than words? Sighs softly for me, that silence lasted 20 years. Every morning, I'd wake up to the same routine, make myself a small cup of coffee, walk to the window, and stare at my phone. It had been years since anyone really called, but still I checked. Out of habit, out of hope, I'm not sure which. Maybe both. The screen always said the same thing: no missed calls. No new messages, and yet every time my heart still did that tiny leap, like maybe today would be different. But it never was. 20 years ago, I was a mother with a family, a home full of laughter, birthdays, dinners, chaos, and love. At least I thought it was love: my daughter Jennifer and my son Christopher, my whole world. I used to tuck them into bed, kiss their foreheads, whisper that I'd always be there, and I was. Chuckles bitterly, oh, I was always there, but somewhere along the line, they stopped being my children, and I became just a name in their phone they never dialed. I sent gifts every Christmas, cards for birthdays. I even saved photos of every parcel I mailed, like proof that I was still trying, like evidence for a trial that would never happen. Sometimes I wrote little notes: I miss you, thinking of you, call me when you can. But you can't make someone call. You can't make someone care. Long pause, small breath. Do you know what it feels like to send love into the void for 20 straight years? To talk to your own phone like it's your child. Some nights I'd scroll through old pictures: Jennifer in her pink graduation dress, Christopher in his baseball uniform. I used to hold those photos against my chest like they were alive. Like if I hugged hard enough, maybe time would fold back on itself, but it never did. Outside my window, life moved on. Other mothers my age walked their grandkids to the park, held tiny hands, laughed over ice cream. I never met mine. I only saw their faces once, years ago, on Facebook, before my children blocked me. Soft laugh. I guess even a grandmother can be too much for their perfect lives. One day I remember whispering, do they even tell them I exist? And the answer was always the same: silence sighs deeply. You know, loneliness has a sound. It's not loud, it's a hum that lives in your walls, in your breathing, in the way the clock ticks louder at night. It's when you realize your phone ringtone has become the most painful melody in the world. Still, I never stopped trying. I told myself maybe they'll call next week, maybe they're just busy, maybe I did something wrong that I can fix. Oh, I used to overthink it all. I even rehearsed conversations in my head. Hi, sweetheart. How are you? Hi, Mom, sorry it's been a while. But that hi never came. Then one ordinary Wednesday I walked to my mailbox. Bills, advertisements, and one envelope, thick ivory with golden letters. My hands shook. I thought it must be a mistake at first. Nobody sends fancy envelopes to people like me. But when I opened it, I saw her name: Jennifer Stone, my daughter. I almost dropped it. My heart was beating so hard I had to sit down. 20 years, and finally a letter. Inside was a printed card, not handwritten, just formal text. You are invited to Jennifer Stone's 45th birthday celebration Saturday, 6 p.m., 10 p.m. Formal dress code, that was it. No love you, Mom, no hope to see you, just the card. But still, it was something. I read it at least 20 times. I even held it to my chest. Laughed softly. How pathetic is that? After all those years of silence, a cold invitation felt like a miracle. And yet, there was a whisper in my chest that said, be careful. But I ignored it. Because when you've been invisible for so long, even a tiny bit of light feels like the sun. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing her, older now, maybe wiser, maybe ready to reconnect. I thought maybe she finally wants her mother back. I imagined the hugs, the tears, the laughter. I even picked out what I'd wear, something simple but nice. I told myself this was it, the moment life turns around, but deep inside, another voice said, why now, why now? After 20 years, I brushed it off. I told myself not to ruin it with doubt. Sometimes hope can be more powerful than reason. Sighs. If only I had listened to that tiny whisper. I spent the next few days preparing. I used what little I had saved to buy a new dress, wine-colored, elegant but humble. Something that said, I'm still your mom, but I belong here too. I even bought her a gift, a set of engraved silverware with her and her husband's initials. $600, practically all I had left after rent and bills. But I told myself, it's okay, this is for family. Family, laughs quietly, sadly funny word, isn't it? The day of the party, I looked at myself in the mirror. Wrinkles, gray hair, tired eyes, but still dignity. I wore my mother's old pearl necklace, the one she gave me when I got married. I whispered to my reflection, you look beautiful, Margaret. Just to remind myself that I still existed. Then I took a taxi to the address on the invitation, a massive house in the richest part of town. I remember looking at it from the sidewalk, lights everywhere, laughter spilling out from the garden, and for the first time in 20 years I smiled. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. But as I stepped closer to the door, a strange feeling washed over me, that quiet warning again, whispering from the back of my mind something was off. My heart was pounding, not from joy but from a strange, heavy kind of fear. Still, I took a deep breath and rang the bell because, after waiting for 20 years, how could I not? Short pause, faint sigh. If only I had known what was waiting for me behind that door. After 2 decades of silence. I finally got invited to my daughter's birthday. But it wasn't a reunion, it was a setup. Have you ever dressed up for a moment that you thought would change your life, only to realize later it was never meant for you at all? That was me, that Saturday evening. I remember how my hands trembled as I zipped up my new dress. It wasn't expensive, but it made me feel like I mattered again. Like maybe, just maybe, I was walking back into my children's lives, not as a stranger, but as a mother. I even put on light makeup, something I hadn't done in years. My old pearl necklace shimmered faintly under the yellow light of my tiny bathroom. I looked at myself and smiled nervously. "You can do this," I whispered. "You're still there, Mom." When the taxi stopped in front of Jennifer's mansion, I felt like I'd stepped into another world. Tall glass windows, white pillars, cars parked in a neat line outside, everything screamed wealth and perfection. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching her gift like a lifeline. Soft laugh. I had imagined so many possible reunions over the years, hugs, apologies, maybe tears. But not this, not a house so big that it looked like it could swallow all the warmth left in the world. As I walked toward the entrance, I could hear music, jazz, the kind people play at fancy parties. My heart raced faster with every step. I kept telling myself, it's okay, this is what love looks like sometimes. People change, maybe she changed too. A housekeeper opened the door before I even knocked. She smiled politely, the kind of smile that says, "You don't belong here, but I'll be nice anyway." "The party's in the back garden," she said, and motioned for me to go through. I walked down a hallway lined with paintings and furniture that probably cost more than my whole apartment. Each step echoed faintly, reminding me that this wasn't my world anymore. And then I saw it. The garden was glowing with fairy lights. Elegant tables, white linens, crystal glasses, trays of champagne. At least 50 people, laughing, posing for pictures, holding conversations that sounded like background music. It was beautiful, but it felt cold. Like stepping into someone else's dream. I looked for Jennifer. When I finally saw her, she was laughing with a group of women who all looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. Hair perfect, dresses designer, smiles rehearsed. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. She looked so grown, so distant. My baby girl, now a woman who didn't even glance around to see if her mother had arrived. I took one hesitant step forward. And then another. When she finally noticed me, her laughter stopped. Our eyes met, and in that split second, I thought I saw something flicker in her gaze. Maybe guilt, maybe annoyance, I couldn't tell. Then she smiled, but not the way I remembered. Not the smile that used to crinkle her nose when she was little. This was a polished, practiced smile. The kind that belongs to someone used to pretending. She walked toward me, kissed the air near my cheek, and said something I could barely hear over the noise. The women beside her looked me up and down, smiling politely, curious but detached, and just like that, my daughter turned away to greet someone else. I stood there, frozen in place, laughed softly, voice trembling. 20 years. 20 years of waiting, and that was my welcome. I found a chair at the far corner of the garden, hidden behind a table, close to a flower arrangement. I sat there quietly, clutching my purse, pretending to sip champagne so I'd have something to do with my hands around me. Families laughed together, took selfies, toasted to good times. I saw another woman my age surrounded by her children and grandchildren. They were feeding her cake, laughing, hugging her shoulders, and that broke me a little because that's what I had dreamed of all those years. To be part of that, to be seen. To be wanted, but my chair stayed empty on both sides. Every now and then I caught Christopher's voice somewhere in the crowd. "My son." I turned my head, and there he was, sharp suit, confident smile, surrounded by men who looked equally successful. He looked just like his father at that age, and then he saw me. For the tiniest second, our eyes locked. He looked right at me and then just turned away, laughs hollowly. I think that hurt even more than if he'd yelled at me, because it confirmed something I'd been afraid to admit for years. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had erased me. I sat there for almost an hour, invisible, smiling when no one was looking, pretending everything was fine. You know what's funny? When you've spent 2 decades being ignored, pretending becomes easy. You learn to smile through the cracks, you learn to laugh at silence, and yet, deep inside, something felt strange about the whole night. Something didn't fit. It wasn't just their distance, it was the way they kept glancing at me. Not with warmth, but calculation. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like they were waiting for something. The speeches started soon after. Her husband, Robert, stood up on a small stage and began thanking everyone for coming. People clapped, cameras flashed. Jennifer went up there beside him, looking radiant, perfect. I smiled proudly, despite everything. Because no matter what, she was still my daughter then. Robert said something that made my hands go cold. "We have a special announcement tonight. Something that will make this family even stronger." The crowd clapped. I didn't understand what was happening, but something inside me whispered again, that same warning from the night I got the invitation. My heart started to beat faster. What kind of announcement would make them invite a mother they'd ignored for 20 years? Soft breath. I should have left right then. I should have walked out with my head held high, but I stayed, because mothers always stay, and maybe, just maybe, I thought I'd finally be part of something again. When they called me to the stage, I thought they wanted to honor me. But the truth, it was something I never could have imagined. You know that feeling when you walk into a room full of people and still feel completely invisible? Sighs softly, that's what it felt like that night, surrounded by laughter, flashing lights, the clinking of glasses, yet not a single soul who truly saw me. The air smelled like expensive perfume and champagne. Waiters moved around carrying trays of food that looked too beautiful to eat. Everyone seemed to know each other, hugging, taking photos, sharing inside jokes. I just sat there quietly, trying to blend into the background. I told myself, don't make it awkward, Margaret. Just smile, be graceful, they'll come talk to you eventually. But they didn't. Every few minutes, I'd glance around, hoping maybe Jennifer would come sit beside me, or maybe Christopher would wave. Nothing, and then out of nowhere, a waiter appeared beside me with a gentle smile, offering champagne. I took it not because I wanted it, but because I needed something to hold. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, the first sip burned. It wasn't bad champagne, it was probably the finest money could buy. But to me, it tasted bitter. Like loneliness wrapped in bubbles, small, nervous laugh. Funny how the more expensive something is, the less it feels like home. From where I sat, I could see Jennifer mingling with her friends. They laughed so freely as if I wasn't even there. As if I was a ghost at her party, a reminder of a life she'd outgrown. I caught Christopher's voice once again, confident, loud, charming. Everyone around him was listening like he was the most interesting man alive. But when his eyes briefly met mine, he looked away immediately. That glance hurt more than anything, because for one fleeting moment, I saw my little boy inside that grown man, and then he vanished again. Sighs I started thinking about when they were young. About all the sacrifices I made, working 2 jobs just to afford their school fees, selling jewelry to pay for Jennifer's piano lessons, staying up late helping Christopher with his homework. I used to tell myself, one day they'll understand. One day they'll look back and know what I gave up for them. But sitting there in that golden-lit garden full of strangers, I realized maybe they never would. Midway through the night, a woman sitting near me leaned over and asked softly, "Are you family?" Her tone wasn't rude, just curious. I smiled faintly and said, "Yes. I'm her mother." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, as if she hadn't even known Jennifer had a mother. She smiled politely, turned back to her friends, and that was that awkward chuckle. Even strangers didn't know I existed. I looked down at the gift I'd brought, the silverware wrapped neatly in ribbon. It suddenly looked so small compared to the diamonds glittering around me. I wondered if Jennifer would even open it, or if it would just sit unopened like every letter I'd sent for years. And then I saw it, a woman about my age sitting near the main table. She was surrounded by her children and grandchildren, laughing loudly, everyone holding her hand, kissing her cheek, taking selfies with her. For a moment, my chest tightened so much I could barely breathe. That's what I had dreamed of. That's what every mother dreams of, to grow old surrounded by love, to see your family grow, to be part of it. But I was sitting alone, pretending I didn't notice how everyone else had someone. The music got louder, and people began clapping as Jennifer's husband walked up to the small stage in the center of the garden. His voice boomed through the speakers, confident, warm, rehearsed. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here to celebrate my incredible wife, Jennifer." Everyone clapped, cheered, whistled. I smiled too, automatically, like a reflex. That's what mothers do, right? Smile when their children are happy, even if they're hurting inside. He continued talking about how lucky he was to have her, how proud he was of everything they'd built. I half listened, sipping from my glass again just to calm my hands. Then he said something that made me sit up straight. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating Jennifer's birthday. We also have something very special to announce." I felt the hairs on my neck rise. I didn't know why, but something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. I looked around. Everyone was paying full attention. Cameras out, smiles bright. Even Jennifer looked excited. Small whisper of confusion in my tone. What kind of announcement could be so important? And then, I noticed something strange. Christopher was walking up to the stage too, smiling, shaking hands, joining Jennifer and her husband. The 3 of them stood together, glowing under the garden lights. They looked perfect, like a picture in a magazine. "We're thrilled to announce," Robert said proudly, "that we've acquired a piece of land by the ocean. A place where we'll build our family's beach house." Applause erupted all around me. I clapped too, out of reflex. But the word family echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. Family. For 20 years, I hadn't been invited to a single dinner, call, or Christmas, and now, suddenly, I was part of a family project. Robert kept speaking, describing how this house would be a place for future generations to gather and make memories. Jennifer was smiling from ear to ear, nodding proudly. Christopher was holding a folder, and when he looked into the crowd, his eyes locked with mine. For a second, the music faded, the laughter dimmed, and everything slowed down, because in that moment I understood something terrible. This wasn't just a family celebration. It was a setup. They hadn't invited me because they missed me, they'd invited me because they needed me. I felt my stomach drop. My fingers gripped the edge of my chair. My children, my own children, hadn't called me in 2 decades, and now, suddenly, they wanted me here for a family project. Soft, trembling breath, I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew it wouldn't be love. When they finally called my name and asked me to come on stage, I thought it was pride in their eyes, but what I saw there was greed. You know that feeling when the whole world slows down, and your heart just knows something is wrong? That's what I felt when Jennifer's husband looked straight at me from that stage. He raised his champagne glass and smiled that perfect, polished smile of his. "Before we continue," he said, "we'd like to call someone very special to join us. And then my name, Mom, why don't you come up here?" Laughed softly, voice trembling for a second. I thought I heard it wrong. Mom, I hadn't heard that word from their mouths in decades. The people around me started clapping, turning their heads, smiling in my direction. My heart raced. My palms went sweaty. I didn't even know how to react. I stood up slowly, adjusting my dress, forcing a shaky smile. I could feel 50 pairs of eyes on me. Every step toward that stage felt heavier than the last. As I climbed the stairs, my knees trembled. Jennifer stretched out her hand and helped me up, smiling for the crowd. Her grip was soft but cold. I could tell it wasn't love, it was performance. "There she is," she said loudly, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "My beautiful mother. After so many years, we're finally together again." The crowd clapped again. I smiled weakly, my throat tight. If only they knew the truth, that those words meant nothing, that we hadn't spoken in 2 decades. That I'd spent countless birthdays alone while she celebrated in mansions like this one. Her husband, Robert, took the microphone again. "We're so happy to have Margaret here tonight," he said warmly. "Because what we're about to announce involves the whole family." The whole family. That phrase made my stomach twist. He continued, "As many of you know, Jennifer and I, along with Christopher, have just purchased a beautiful piece of land by the ocean. It's going to be our family beach house, a place to build memories, to gather every summer." People clapped again. I stood there, frozen, forcing a smile, and then came the moment that shattered everything. Robert looked at Jennifer. She gave a little nod, then Christopher, my son, stepped forward, holding a folder. He said, "We've been thinking, since this is a family house, every family member should be part of it. That includes you, Mom." The crowd went quiet. Every eye turned toward me. I blinked, unsure I'd heard correctly. "Me," I whispered under my breath. Christopher continued smoothly, "We know you sold your house a few years ago after Dad passed. And we thought it would be meaningful if you contributed some of that money to this beach house project. That way you'd have your share in it too." Long silence. My heart stopped. I wasn't sure which part hurt more, that they'd tracked my finances, or that they'd dressed this whole thing as family love just to take my money. Jennifer tightened her hand on my shoulder. "It's not a big deal, Mom, just a contribution, maybe 200,000. It's an investment in your grandchildren's future," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with fake kindness. I stared at her, completely stunned. 20 years. 20 years without a single call, 20 years of silence. And now they remembered I existed because they wanted my savings. I felt my face grow warm. The music had stopped, but my ears were ringing. People were still watching, smiling, thinking this was some heartwarming family moment. Inside, I wanted to scream. But outside, I just stood still. Christopher opened the folder, showing me a stack of printed documents. "I've already prepared everything," he said professionally. "It's just a matter of signing and transferring the funds. We'll handle all the paperwork." The way he spoke, cold, businesslike, it didn't even sound like a son. It sounded like a lawyer talking to a client. Robert added, "It's really for your own good, Margaret. You'll have ownership in the house. It'll be a wonderful legacy for all of us." Soft laugh filled with disbelief. "For my own good," I thought. That was the same line people use before they steal from you politely. My throat tightened. My voice barely came out. You invited me here for this." Jennifer smiled wider, whispering under her breath so no one else could hear. "Don't make a scene, Mom, just sign it. It'll be good for everyone." For a moment I felt dizzy. The fairy lights above me blurred. I had dreamed of this reunion for 2 decades, imagined love, forgiveness, family. And now here I was, being cornered in front of strangers to give up everything I had left. Something inside me cracked, but not like before. This wasn't heartbreak. It was awakening. I suddenly saw everything clearly, the false smiles, the rehearsed tone, the way Christopher held those papers like he already knew I'd sign them. All those years of unanswered calls, ignored gifts, unopened letters, they'd forgotten me when I had love. But now when I had money, I was Mom again. I took a deep breath. The crowd still clapped softly, waiting for a sweet ending. They thought they were watching a family reunion. They had no idea it was a robbery in disguise, and in that moment I did something I never thought I could. I smiled. Not the broken kind, not the pleading kind. A calm, knowing smile because I finally understood. I wasn't the fool anymore. They had spent years pretending I didn't exist. Now I would show them what it really meant to disappear. "I need to think about it," I said quietly into the microphone, my voice surprisingly steady. Jennifer's fake smile froze. "Mom, there's really nothing to think about," she said quickly, trying to control the situation. "It's just a formality." But I shook my head. "No," I repeated softly. "Not tonight." Robert tried to laugh it off. The audience tittered awkwardly, but I could feel the tension rising. I could see it in their faces, that flash of anger beneath the smiles, and just like that, the illusion shattered. I stepped down from the stage slowly. My heels clicked against the wood like a drum beat, 1, 2, 3. My body was shaking, but I kept my head high. I walked straight toward the exit, my heart pounding. I could hear Jennifer calling my name behind me, her voice sharp now, no longer sweet. But I didn't turn back. I picked up my purse from the table, the one that still held the gift I'd never give, and walked out into the night. The cold air hit my face like freedom after 20 years of begging to be seen. I had finally done something that made me visible to myself. That night, I didn't just walk away from their party, I walked away from my old life. And by morning, I knew exactly what I had to do next. Sometimes the smallest word can hold the greatest power, just 2 letters. No, for 20 years I had said yes to everything. Yes to their silence, yes to their rejection, yes to my own loneliness. But that night when I walked out of that glittering garden, I said no for the first time, and it felt like breathing after drowning. Sighs softly, the cool night air hit my face. I remember gripping my purse tight against my chest as if it were the last piece of myself I had left. I walked fast, my heels clicking on the driveway, my eyes blurry with tears I refused to let fall behind me. The laughter from the party continued as if nothing had happened. I could still hear faint jazz music drifting through the open windows, cheerful, empty, fake. I stood by the road waiting for a taxi. My heart was racing so fast it almost hurt. But beneath the panic, beneath the ache, there was a strange calm. Like a storm had passed inside me and all that was left was clarity. When the cab finally arrived, the driver looked at me through the rearview mirror. "You coming from a party, ma'am?" he asked kindly. I just smiled and said something like that. As the car pulled away, I glanced one last time at the mansion glowing behind me, the laughter, the lights, the clinking glasses. That wasn't my world anymore. Maybe it never was. I leaned my head against the window and whispered to myself, "They didn't call you for 20 years, Margaret. Don't wait for them to call now." It was funny, in a sad way. I had begged for their love for so long that I forgot how to love myself. Every gift I sent, every message I left, every desperate voicemail was me saying, "Please remember I exist." But that night in the back of that taxi, I realized something life-changing. I didn't need to be remembered. I needed to be free. Small laugh, shaky voice. You know what's ironic? They thought I was weak. They thought I'd sign those papers just to feel included again. But they forgot one thing: mothers survive everything. Even heartbreak that lasts 2 decades. When I reached home, I kicked off my shoes and sat in the dark. The apartment was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. I stared at the walls covered in old photos, the ones that used to comfort me, but now they just hurt. Jennifer's graduation picture, Christopher's first baseball game, our family trip to the beach when we couldn't even afford a hotel. Just memories frozen in frames, reminders of a love that used to exist. I whispered softly, "You were such good kids once." And then I laughed. A dry, tired laugh that turned into a sigh. "Maybe that's what makes this harder," I said out loud. They were good, and I believed they still could be, but good people don't humiliate their mothers in front of strangers. Good people don't investigate your finances like you're a bank account. Good people don't pretend you're part of their family only when they need money. I sat there for a long time, staring at the photos until my vision blurred. Then, slowly, I got up and began taking them off the wall. One by one, the sound of the nails scraping out of the wall echoed in the quiet. I placed the frames carefully in a box. I didn't throw them away, not yet, but I knew I would one day. When I was done, the wall was bare. For the first time in years, it felt like I could breathe in my own home again. I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and just thought. The city lights flickered outside, and I thought about all the birthdays, Christmases, and anniversaries I'd spent alone. All the times I'd told myself, "It's okay, they'll come around." They never did, and maybe that was the point. Maybe I had to stop waiting for closure and start creating it myself. I smiled to myself. A small, tired smile, but real. "Enough," I whispered. "No more waiting." That night I made a decision. I wasn't going to call them. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to disappear. For real this time, not in a dramatic way, not out of spite or anger, but for peace, for dignity, for self-respect, because the truth is, sometimes you have to lose everything, your home, your name, your family, to finally find yourself again. I remember looking at the clock. It was past midnight. I picked up my old notebook from the shelf, the one where I used to write grocery lists and reminders. I flipped it open and wrote 3 words on a blank page: start over. Completely. Then under that I wrote my plan, step by step, not emotional, practical, logical. For the first time in years, my pen didn't shake. My handwriting was steady. I was steady. Step 1, find a lawyer. Step 2, change my name. Step 3, close every account they could trace. Step 4, sell the apartment. Step 5, move somewhere new. Step 6, disappear. And at the bottom of the page I added a note to myself, a promise. No one will find you unless you want to be found. I closed the notebook and smiled faintly. The tears that had been sitting behind my eyes for hours didn't fall. Not this time. I felt something new instead, power. Quiet, soft, but strong. You see, saying no didn't just mean refusing their offer. It meant refusing to be their victim. Refusing to live in a story where I was always waiting for love that wasn't coming. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in decades. No ringing phones, no what-ifs, no aching hope. Just silence, calm, final, beautiful silence, soft, reflective laugh, and I remember thinking, if silence is all I'll ever get from them, then maybe it's time I make silence my own. When I woke up the next morning, the sun was streaming through my window. For once, I didn't check my phone. I didn't wait for messages that never came. I just smiled and whispered, "Good morning, Margaret," then paused because even that name didn't feel like me anymore. That morning, I didn't just wake up, I was reborn. And the first thing I did was walk out the door to start planning my disappearance. Have you ever wanted to just vanish, not out of fear, not to escape trouble, but to finally find peace? Sighs softly. That's exactly what I felt that morning. The kind of peace that comes after years of pain. Quiet, still. Powerful. I woke up to sunlight sneaking through the curtains. The air felt different, lighter, like the world had shifted just a little overnight. For the first time in a long, long time, I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't check for calls or messages, because I knew there wouldn't be any, and somehow that didn't hurt anymore. I walked into the kitchen, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat down at the small wooden table. My old notebook was still there, open to the page I'd written last night, start over, completely. I looked at it for a long time. Those words weren't just a plan. They were a lifeline. That's when it hit me. If I wanted to truly start over, I couldn't be Margaret Ross anymore. That woman had been a ghost for 20 years, haunting the memories of people who didn't care. I needed to bury her and become someone new, so I opened the notebook again and wrote at the top of a new page, Step 1. Change my name. It sounded insane, even to me. But there was a strange thrill in the idea, like rewriting your story after someone else tried to end it for you. That same afternoon, I took a bus downtown and searched for a lawyer. I found a small office with a golden sign, Sarah Parker, Family Law and Civil Affairs. She looked to be in her 50s, kind eyes, calm voice, the kind of person who'd seen too many stories like mine. I sat across from her and said quietly, "I need to change my name." Completely, she blinked but didn't look shocked. "May I ask why?" she said gently. I smiled faintly. "Because I've been dead for 20 years and it's time I came back to life." Sarah didn't ask more. She just nodded and said, "Then let's get you a new beginning." She explained everything, the process, the paperwork, the timeline. It would take around 3 months. "You'll need to publish the name change in the official gazette," she said, "but once it's approved, it's permanent, permanent." I liked that word. I chose the name Selena Owens. Don't ask me why. Maybe because it sounded peaceful, maybe because it felt free. Selena like the moon, quiet but always there, even when unseen. When I signed the form, Sarah looked up and said softly, "Goodbye, Margaret," and I smiled. Goodbye indeed. Short pause. That was step 1. Next came the money. I closed every single bank account that had my old name on it. The banker looked confused. "Are you sure, ma'am?" But I just nodded. Completely sure. He handed me a cashier's check with everything I had left from the house I sold years ago, about $215,000. Every penny I had worked, saved, and sacrificed for. Then I walked straight into another bank on the opposite side of the city and opened a new account under Selena Owens. I told the manager no public information, no linked contacts. He looked puzzled, but he did it. When I walked out of that bank, I swear the air felt different, lighter. As if every breath wasn't being borrowed anymore. Soft laugh. It's strange. When you start letting go, you realize how heavy you've been carrying things that were never yours to carry. The next few weeks were a blur of preparation. I met with Sarah again to rewrite my will. I told her, "I want to remove my children as beneficiaries." She looked at me carefully and asked, "Are you sure?" I smiled. "They removed me from their lives long before I did this." We listed everything I owned, my bank accounts, insurance, small assets, and redirected it all to a foundation that helped abandoned elderly women. It felt poetic, almost healing. When I left her office that day, I didn't feel empty. I felt light. Pauses, softly, reflective tone. If you've ever had to rebuild from nothing, you'll understand what I mean. It's not sadness anymore, it's clarity. And hey, if stories like this help you see life differently, take a moment and hit subscribe. There's always another story waiting, one that might just change how you see yourself. Gentle sigh. Now, back to that moment. With my legal steps moving forward, I started preparing to move far away. I contacted a real estate agent and told her I needed to sell my apartment fast. I didn't care about profit. I just wanted it gone. Within 2 weeks, I had an offer from a young family, husband, wife, and a little boy who couldn't stop smiling when he saw the place. I said yes immediately. The price was lower than what it was worth, but it didn't matter. I wasn't selling a home, I was shedding skin. While waiting for the paperwork, I started packing. Slowly, carefully. Not with sadness this time, with purpose. I kept only the essentials, a few clothes, my jewelry, some books, my mother's pearls. The hardest part was the photos sized softly those old pictures. They had been my only companions for years. Jennifer in her school uniform, Christopher with his gap-toothed smile. I looked at each one and whispered, "Thank you for the memories," before placing them into a box. Not the trash, not yet. I couldn't destroy them, but I couldn't keep them where I could see them either. I stored the box in the back of the closet. Out of sight, out of reach. After that, I canceled my phone number, the same number I'd kept for 15 years. The same number my children never called. The clerk at the mobile store asked, "Would you like to keep it active for a family plan?" I smiled faintly. No family left to call me. I bought a prepaid SIM card instead, no trace, no record. I deleted my Facebook account, erased every old email address, unsubscribed from every service that knew my name, and just like that, Margaret Ross disappeared. Each day, I felt myself becoming more like Selena Owens. A woman with no past, no expectations, no ghosts haunting her inbox. Gentle, peaceful laugh. I didn't cry once through that entire process. Not when I closed my bank, not when I packed the photos, not even when I handed over my apartment keys, because for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't losing something. I was gaining myself. When everything was finally set, I looked around my empty apartment one last time. The walls were bare, the shelves clean, the air still. I whispered to the room, "Thank you for keeping me safe all these years." Then I locked the door behind me and didn't look back. When I walked out that door, I wasn't Margaret anymore. I was Selena, and I thought my story had ended there until 6 months later my phone rang. You know that feeling when your past finally catches up to you, right when you thought it never would? Sighs softly. That's exactly what happened to me 6 months after I disappeared. By then, Selena Owens wasn't just a name on paper anymore, she was real. I had moved to a small coastal town 2 hours away. Quiet, slow, peaceful. The kind of place where the loudest sound was the ocean brushing against the shore and the laughter of children playing in the distance. I rented a little cottage near the water. White curtains, blue door, a wooden bench outside where I'd sit with a cup of tea every evening, watching the waves fade into twilight. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. No one there knew my story. No one called me mom. No one asked about my family. And for the first time in decades, that felt beautiful. Every morning, I'd walk to the local market, buy fresh bread, talk to the shopkeeper about the weather, and come home to the quiet hum of my old radio. Simple, ordinary things, the kind I used to take for granted. I had no schedule, no rush, no pressure to be anyone else. Just me. One evening, as I sat outside watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink, I smiled to myself and whispered, "You did it, Selena. You finally made it." Small, proud laugh, and I really believed that was the end of my story, until one afternoon my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize flashed across the screen. My stomach dropped. Nobody ever called me. Nobody even had this number. For a second I thought maybe it was a wrong number, but something, instinct maybe, told me to pick up. "Hello," I said softly. A woman's voice came through, calm, professional. "Good afternoon. Am I speaking with Miss Selena Owens?" "Yes," I said slowly. "This is Emily from Parker and Associates. I work with Sarah Parker, the attorney who helped you with your name change." My heart skipped. I hadn't spoken to Sarah in months. "Yes, I remember," I said, gripping the phone tighter. "Is everything all right?" Emily hesitated. Then she said something that made my chest tighten. "There's been an inquiry about you. From a law firm representing your children." The world seemed to freeze for a moment. My mind went blank. My children, I hadn't heard those words together in so long that they felt foreign. "An inquiry?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "Yes," Emily continued gently. "They've been trying to locate a Margaret Ross. Apparently they can't find her. Your lawyer wanted to make sure you were aware before responding." I couldn't speak, my throat locked up. I felt a strange mix of anger, sadness, and something else. Not fear, not anymore. After a long silence, I finally said, "What do they want?" Emily hesitated again. "It seems they're trying to settle a financial matter. A property dispute related to your late husband's estate," but from the tone of their letter, it sounded more personal than legal. Soft laugh filled with disbelief. "Personal?" My children hadn't been personal with me in 2 decades. I took a deep breath. "Please tell Sarah not to respond," I said calmly. "There is no Margaret Ross anymore." Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, "I understand, Miss Owens." When I hung up, I just sat there in silence. The ocean waves were calm, steady, almost mocking in how peaceful they were compared to what was happening inside me. They were looking for me. After 20 years of silence, after everything they said and did, now they wanted to find me. I wanted to laugh, I wanted to cry. But mostly I just felt tired. Deep sigh. It's strange. You can spend half your life begging to be seen and the other half hoping they never see you again. I walked down to the beach that evening. The sand was cold beneath my feet and the air smelled of salt and rain. I looked out at the water and whispered, "Why now?" And then it hit me. They hadn't called because they missed me. They called because they needed something. They always did. Short laugh, bitter but calm. Maybe they thought I'd feel guilty. Maybe they thought I'd rush back like before, desperate, emotional, ready to forgive everything, but they didn't know Selena didn't beg for love. Selena didn't chase people who only remembered her when they wanted something. That night, I sat on the sand until the stars came out, thinking about everything I'd lost and everything I'd found. It's funny, isn't it? I lost a family, but I found peace. I lost my name, but I found myself. I picked up a small seashell, rolled it in my palm, and smiled. You waited 20 years for their call, I whispered to myself. And now that they've called, you don't even need to answer. That realization felt so freeing I almost laughed out loud. Gentle voice, reflective tone. If you've ever let go of someone who hurt you, truly let go, you'll understand this feeling. It's not revenge, it's not pride, it's peace, and if you want to hear more stories that remind you you're not alone in your pain, make sure to subscribe. I promise, the next one might just touch a part of your heart you forgot existed. After that night, I didn't think about them again for weeks. I went back to my routine, walking on the beach, writing in my journal, baking bread in the mornings. My heart had finally stopped aching, until one morning, another letter arrived. It was from a new law firm. Short. Direct to Miss Margaret Ross or any living heir. You are hereby notified of a civil suit filed against you by Jennifer Stone and Christopher Ross. I stared at the paper in disbelief. A lawsuit. From my own children, they hadn't called to apologize. They hadn't called to reconnect, they called because they wanted something, and when they didn't get it, they went to court. Soft exhale, I folded the letter neatly and placed it on the table. Then I smiled, a calm, sad smile. They were chasing a ghost, because Margaret Ross didn't exist anymore and Selena Owens, she wasn't running. They couldn't find me as their mother, but somehow they found me as a lawsuit. And that's when I decided this time I would fight back. Have you ever been so shocked that you couldn't even get angry, you just sat there, staring, half smiling at the absurdity of it all? Sighs softly. That was me, sitting in my little cottage by the ocean, holding a letter that said I was being sued by my own children. I read the words again and again, thinking maybe I misunderstood. But no, it was clear as day. Plaintiffs, Jennifer Stone and Christopher Ross. Defendant, Margaret Ross. Claim, unlawful withholding of family property and funds belonging to the estate of the late Richard Ross. Unlawful withholding. From the same people who hadn't called me in 2 decades, hadn't sent a single letter, hadn't even wished me happy birthday. Laughs quietly. Bitterly now they wanted the little bit of peace I had left legally. The irony burned like acid in my chest. I sat back in my chair, staring at the letter, and whispered, "You really don't know when to stop, do you?" For a few minutes I didn't move. The ocean breeze drifted in through the open window, fluttering the curtains as if mocking the storm rising inside me. Then I took a deep breath, picked up the phone, and called Sarah, my lawyer, the only person who knew who I really was. "Sarah Parker speaking," she answered. "Hi, Sarah." "It's Selena." I hesitated before saying the next part. "I just received something, a lawsuit from my children." There was a long silence on the other end, then she sighed softly. "Oh, Margaret, I mean, Selena, I'm so sorry. But I had a feeling something like this might happen." I laughed quietly. "You sound calmer than I expected. You've seen a lot of families fight over money," she said. "But this, it's not about money, is it?" "No," I said, looking out at the ocean. "It's about control, it always has been." Sarah asked me to forward her the documents. She said she'd review them and call me back. I thanked her and hung up, my hands shaking. I put the papers on the table and stared at them again. Those pages didn't just represent a lawsuit. They represented every ignored phone call, every unopened letter, every birthday missed, every lie I'd told myself to keep loving them. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying the image of that party, Jennifer smiling under the lights, Christopher holding those papers, and me, standing there, still hoping for love when all they wanted was leverage. Deep sigh. The next morning, I made a choice. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide. For 20 years I'd been silent, swallowed my pain, my anger, my dignity. But not anymore. I was done playing the quiet mother. When Sarah called back, she had already gone through the documents. "It's weak," she said confidently. "They're claiming you withheld funds that were part of your late husband's business, but the will is clear, it all legally belonged to you." I smiled faintly. "They're hoping I'll settle. That I'll be too scared to respond." Sarah chuckled softly. "Then let's surprise them." We began building a case, not to attack, but to defend, firmly and clearly. Every record, every transaction, every signature was in my name. My husband's assets had been closed and taxed years ago. There was nothing for them to claim, but I didn't stop there. I wrote a letter to their lawyer myself under Selena Owens. It was short, professional, and cold. "Your clients are pursuing an individual who no longer exists. Please direct all further communication through legal channels. Any attempt to contact me personally will be considered harassment." No emotion. No weakness, just truth. When I emailed it, I felt something inside me shift again. For years, I had been waiting for closure from them, but now I was creating it myself. Soft laugh. I realized something that day. Closure doesn't always come with apologies. Sometimes it comes in the form of boundaries. Weeks passed, and the case started moving forward. Their lawyer tried to intimidate me, threatening to expose me, to drag me into court, to reveal my identity. But there was nothing to expose. I had done everything legally. I wasn't hiding, I had simply stopped being who they wanted me to be. One evening, Sarah called me again. "They've demanded an in-person appearance," she said carefully. "Are you ready for that?" I took a long pause. The wind from the sea brushed against my face. "Yes," I said softly. "I think it's time they finally saw me not as their mother, not as their victim, but as a woman who survived them." Gentle, reflective tone. It's strange how life turns, isn't it? You spend years chasing the people who hurt you, and one day they end up chasing you instead. That night, as I watched the ocean waves under the moonlight, I whispered, "You're stronger than you ever thought you'd have to be." Slight laugh. If you've ever stood up to someone who made you feel small and finally took your power back, you'll understand this. And if you're still on your way there, subscribe and stay. Sometimes the stories we hear remind us that it's never too late to take control again. Days turned into weeks, and finally I received the notice. Court hearing, March 12th, 10 a.m. I printed it, folded it neatly, and placed it beside my morning tea. The date didn't scare me, it didn't even hurt. It felt like an ending. When I was finally ready for the night before the hearing, I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my hair, wearing a simple black dress. My face had aged, yes, but my eyes were steady. I whispered softly to my reflection, "They wanted Margaret, they'll meet Selena." Pause, quiet confidence in tone. The next morning, I walked into that courtroom, not as the broken mother they remembered, but as someone who had rebuilt herself from ashes. I didn't know how it would end. But for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't scared to find out. When I walked into that courtroom, they didn't recognize me at first, maybe because I wasn't the same woman anymore. You know that strange calm that hits right before a storm when you're scared but also free? That's exactly what I felt the morning I walked into that courtroom. The building smelled like polished wood and dust, quiet, serious, and cold. I could hear faint echoes of footsteps, the shuffle of papers, the murmurs of people waiting for their cases to be called. I sat in the back row, hands folded on my lap, wearing my simple black dress and an old gray shawl. No makeup. No jewelry, just calm. When the clerk finally called the case, Jennifer Stone and Christopher Ross versus Margaret Ross, I took a slow breath and stood up. For a split second, I almost smiled. Because even the way it was read, it didn't fit anymore. There was no Margaret Ross here. Not anymore. As I walked toward the front, I saw them, Jennifer and Christopher, sitting at their table, both dressed sharply, expensive suits, polished shoes, pretending to look composed. Jennifer's hair was perfectly styled, her eyes heavy with makeup but empty of warmth. Christopher sat beside her, adjusting his tie, tapping a pen against the table like he was irritated to even be here. And then they saw me. Jennifer's eyes widened first. For a moment, confusion flickered across her face like she was staring at a stranger. Christopher leaned forward slightly, squinting. I could see it in their expressions, the disbelief. I had aged, yes, but there was something else they couldn't recognize anymore. Strength, no shaky hands. No teary eyes, no desperate smile, just peace. They whispered something to each other, and I caught Jennifer mouthing the words, "Is that her?" Soft, half laugh under breath. Even now, after everything, they weren't sure. The judge entered and everyone stood. Once we were seated again, the case began. Their lawyer, a tall man with a voice like ice, started his speech. He talked about family betrayal, unfair distribution, unaccounted funds. His words painted me as a selfish, greedy woman who had hidden money that rightfully belonged to her children. I just sat there quietly listening. Not a single muscle in my face moved. For years I had cried over them. I had screamed in silence, begged, prayed, waited, but not anymore, not here. When their lawyer finally finished, my attorney, Sarah Parker, stood up, calm, steady, confident. She smiled faintly before speaking. "Your Honor, the plaintiff's story is touching but false. My client, legally known as Selena Owens, has fulfilled every obligation related to her late husband's estate. The documents will prove there was no withheld property, no misused funds, and no fraud." She handed over a thick file, my file, every document, every signature, every tax clearance, neatly organized and timestamped. The judge flipped through it, nodding occasionally. Then Sarah continued, "But this isn't just about paperwork, Your Honor. This is about 20 years of silence, about two grown adults who abandoned their mother only to remember her when she became useful." Her words echoed in the courtroom. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably. Christopher stared at the table. Sarah's voice softened. They didn't sue her for money, they sued her because she finally said no. That one line hung in the air like a thunderclap. For the first time, I looked straight at Jennifer. Her jaw tightened, but her eyes looked uncertain. I could see guilt trying to crawl its way through her armor. Christopher, on the other hand, just looked angry, like he couldn't believe I was standing there, unbroken. When it was my turn to speak, the judge asked gently, "Do you have anything to say, Mrs. Ross?" I smiled faintly. "That's not my name anymore, Your Honor." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Oh, my name is Selena Owens." I said it softly but clearly. I turned slightly toward Jennifer and Christopher. "Margaret Ross died a long time ago, around the same time her children stopped calling. There was a soft murmur in the courtroom. Jennifer looked down, her face pale. Christopher clenched his fists. I continued, my voice steady, almost gentle. I spent years sending letters that were never opened. Gifts that were returned. I called, I begged, I waited. I kept a part of myself alive for people who had already forgotten me. But one day I realized I was waiting for ghosts. I paused, took a breath, and ghosts don't call back. The judge watched me closely, not with pity but respect. I smiled again, not at my children but at myself. So I stopped waiting. I chose peace, and if peace looks like disappearance, then so be it. Sarah placed her hand lightly on my arm, signaling that I didn't need to say more. The judge nodded slowly. After a long silence, he spoke. The court finds no evidence of financial misconduct. All claims are dismissed. Just like that, it was over. Jennifer's lips parted like she wanted to say something. But no words came out. Christopher leaned back in his chair, jaw tight, eyes burning with anger. I stood up quietly, adjusted my shawl, picked up my bag. As I walked past them, I stopped for just a second. Not to gloat, not to wound, but to end it. I looked at Jennifer. You had 20 years to find your mother, I said softly. Now you can spend the rest of your life wondering if you ever really knew her. She didn't respond. Just stared at the table, motionless. Soft sigh, mixed with relief, and with that I walked out of the courtroom. The moment the doors closed behind me, I felt the weight lift off my chest. The sunlight spilling through the glass ceiling hit my face, warm and golden. For the first time in decades, I felt proud, not as a mother, not as a victim, but as a woman who had finally freed herself. Gentle, reflective tone. Sometimes justice isn't about punishing others. It's about proving to yourself that you were right to walk away, and if stories like this remind you of your own strength, don't forget to subscribe, because there's always a story that teaches us letting go can be its own kind of victory. As I stepped outside into the quiet street, I breathed deeply. The world was bright, alive, full of sound. I had never noticed how beautiful ordinary air could feel. The judge may have set me free legally, but truth be told, I had freed myself long before that verdict ever came. When the judge's gavel came down that morning, the sound echoed like thunder, sharp, final, and freeing. Tap, and just like that, 20 years of pain, waiting, and silence ended with one strike of wood on wood. Sighs softly. It's funny, you think healing will feel loud, triumphant, cinematic. But it doesn't. It feels quiet, like standing alone in sunlight after decades of shadow. As I stepped outside that courthouse, the winter wind brushed against my face. The sky was clear, the air cold, but I felt warm inside. Light. Empty in the best possible way. For the first time in years, I didn't look over my shoulder. I didn't wait for anyone to call after me. I just walked, steady, calm, free. When I reached the bottom of the courthouse stairs, I paused and looked up at the sky. I whispered softly, "You did it, Margaret." Then I smiled and corrected myself. "No, Selena did." Gentle laugh under breath. That name, Selena, it used to feel like a disguise. But now it felt like home. Sarah came out a few moments later, handing me the official papers. "It's over," she said, smiling kindly. I nodded. "No," I said softly, "it's finally over." We hugged briefly. She said something like, "I hope you find peace now," and I told her I already have. That night I took the last train back to my coastal town. The ride was long and quiet, filled with strangers dozing off, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels, and my own thoughts swirling like ocean waves. I stared out the window, watching the city lights fade behind me. The reflection staring back wasn't a broken woman anymore. She looked older, yes, but calmer, softer, whole. When the train stopped, the salty breeze of my little seaside town greeted me again. I walked home, each step slow, deliberate, peaceful. My cottage looked the same, white curtains fluttering in the wind, the blue door waiting patiently. I turned the key, stepped inside, and was wrapped in the quiet warmth of my own space. I lit a candle on the small wooden table and brewed myself a cup of tea. The kind of tea I used to drink when I had nothing but my thoughts for company, but tonight I wasn't lonely. Tonight I was content. As I sat there, I opened my old notebook, the one that had started it all. The first page still read, "Start over." Completely. I smiled faintly and added a new line below it, "Done, completely." I leaned back in my chair, the sound of the ocean in the background. The waves were soft tonight, gentle, almost like a lullaby. For the first time, I allowed myself to think of Jennifer and Christopher without bitterness. Not as villains, not as thieves, but simply as people I once loved, and maybe that was enough. Quiet sigh. You can't force love. You can't teach gratitude, but you can learn peace. The truth is, forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about setting yourself free from the weight they left behind, and I think that's what I did. I set myself free. A few weeks later, I went through the closet and found the old box of photos I'd hidden away. Jennifer's graduation smile, Christopher's baseball glove, our family picture at the beach. I sat with them one last time. My eyes didn't water this time, they just softened. I ran my fingers over each picture and whispered, "Thank you for being part of my story. But this chapter is closed." Then I took the box, walked down to the shore, and watched the sunset turn the sky orange and gold. The waves rolled gently, whispering secrets only the sea could understand. I opened the box, took out the photos, and one by one let the wind carry them away. Some floated for a moment before sinking. Some vanished instantly, and just like that, I let the past go. I stood there for a long time, bare feet in the cold sand, the breeze brushing through my hair. I whispered softly, goodbye, not in pain. Not in anger, just goodbye, simple, clean, final, small, soft laugh. It's strange how goodbye can sometimes feel like coming home. That night, I sat by my window again, tea in hand, candle flickering. I could hear waves crashing in the distance, a rhythm I had come to love, and for once the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like music. I smiled to myself and whispered, "You're okay now, Selena," because I was. I truly was. I may have lost my children, I may have lost my name, but in return I found peace. And peace, I realized, is the rarest kind of love, soft, reflective tone. So, if you're listening to this and you've ever felt forgotten, unwanted, unseen, please remember. Sometimes life doesn't give you closure from others. You give it to yourself, and if this story touched something in your heart, make sure to subscribe, because somewhere out there, someone else is learning to say goodbye, and maybe your story will remind them it's possible. As the night grew quiet, I blew out the candle. The flame flickered once, twice, then disappeared, leaving behind a thin trail of smoke that drifted up and vanished into the still air. And in that silence, I felt it, the truth I had been chasing for so long. I wasn't waiting for my children anymore. I wasn't waiting for forgiveness or validation. I was simply free. My name is Selena Owens. Once upon a time, I was a mother who waited 20 years for a phone call that never came. Now, I don't wait anymore, because sometimes peace isn't found in who comes back, but in who finally walks away.